Welcome back to Analysis with me, Amjad Salim. In this half, we'll be looking at the issue of BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, an economic pressure campaign aimed at pressurizing the state of Israel to comply with human rights standards. King College London Student Union has again been in the news this week when it passed a motion endorsing and committing the union to boycotting Israeli products, goods and services, as well as highlighting the university itself. King has strongly distanced itself from the motion and stated in a press release that King's College London does not support or engage in boycotts of academic institutions. Universities depend on freedoms of speech and freedom of inquiry, which are fundamental to both teaching and research. King's College London Students' Union is constitutionally separate from and independent of King's College London. The BDS motion passed at the Student General Meeting on 25th March 2014 is a matter for the Students' Union, an independent registered charity and a membership organisation governed by its own Board of Trustees. The UK Universities Minister David Willetts has assured Israel that there would be no university-led academic boycotts of Israel in Britain, but this hasn't deterred one professional body, the Royal Institute of British Architects, from backing a boycott. So are boycotts useful, and how effective are they in bringing about their desired goals? Joining me in the studio once again to discuss BDS in universities are Hilary Aked, a journalist and doctoral student at the University of Bath, Mohammed Amin, Vice Chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Ehtisham Malik Afzal, President of King's College London Action Palestine, and on the line is Paul Osiskin, a political commentator. Welcome to you all. Ehtisham, let me just start with you and the recent motion at the King's College. How significant was that in your opinion?
Oh, very significant, because it's an actual mandate from the students, the student body, that this is a policy, this is something that they take seriously. So it's something which it's been in the process for a long time. We started it with a campaign against G4S at the start of the year. And G4S are an organisation which are complicit in the occupation. We got word that they were in line to bid for a multi-million-pound security contract at the university. So we mobilised the students on campus and talking to people on campus, having stalls, raising awareness about it. I mean, they would shoot themselves in the foot quite often because G4S, there wouldn't be a day that went by without a negative story about G4S in the news. So we extended that campaign to BDS. Widened it out to BDS, and it was difficult because in terms of G4S, it was a lot easier because people knew about their violations, but BDS, because there's a lot of misconceptions about it, and that's why it's so important that we got this through.
How much of a mandate is it, given the fact that 45% sort of were not in support, is it?
Oh, of course. I understand that, but that's any issue. The fact that this is seen as such a controversial issue, for us to win by nearly 100 votes, when there was mass mobilisation from the students, 100 votes, we won by 2/3. We got 2/3 of the vote, so that is a mandate from the students.
Paul, can you hear me?
Hear me?
Hi, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to get your take on this. I mean, how effective do you think an academic BDS would be, and you know, is there some traction in this?
In terms of academic boycott, I think there's very little traction inside Israel. In terms of the wider boycott, in terms of the scope that BDS seeks to pursue, I know that the government of Israel has gone into panic mode whenever this matter comes up.
Great. Thanks. Mohammed, I mean, do you think BDS is a useful tool? Do you think it is sort of what we need to actually get issues of human rights up?
Are you talking about boycotts of countries generally, or boycotts specifically of Israel? Because, of course, at different times, different countries have faced boycotts, some with more success than others. Coming back to Israel itself, I think, to my mind, there is a clear distinction between Israel and Israel's settlements in the West Bank. Israel is a country in good standing with the United Kingdom. It's a friend of ours. I personally am a member of Conservative Friends of Israel, and I see no reason at the moment for boycotts of Israel. On the other hand, the settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law. That's not just me speaking, that's the opinion of the Attorney General, that these settlements are illegal under international law. And I wouldn't want to buy things from settlements in Israel, in the West Bank. So I think we need to be very clear what we're talking about. Are we talking about Israel, or are we talking about Israeli settlements in the West Bank?
Hillary, do you agree with that, this thing, or do you think it's a much more wider argument then?
I think Mohammed should be applauded for being honest, that he doesn't necessarily, it's not an objection to the tactic of boycott, he doesn't think Israel should be boycotted, which is the opposite of what you see with a lot of Israel supporters. They just claim that, you know, they're against boycott as a tactic. But I disagree with Mohammed that, you know, we can actually separate Israel from its decades-long occupation and from the discrimination that Palestinians experience within Israel, as well as, of course, the Palestinian refugees around the world. Israel is responsible for all of that. It's controlling the lives of millions. And in the West Bank and Gaza, that's essentially a military dictatorship and a siege. And as Mohammed says as well, Britain is a friend to Israel at the moment, and America is a friend to Israel. So the international community has a big responsibility for the oppression of the Palestinians. Now this is civil society saying the peace talks have not worked. You know, dialogue has not worked for decades. We've failed to bring justice or peace. And so this is a response to that. I mean, the BDS call was launched in 2005, which is 1 year after the International Court of Justice said the wall is illegal, you've got to dismantle it, and Israel did nothing. So it's a civil society movement to actually change the status quo. And I think, you know, what happened at King's is brilliant, and it's part of a really wider movement which is democratic.
Paul, in terms of, I think that's a very good point, that it is civil society that does seem to be making this move, and it's interesting that it's coming from the students, yet the university authorities don't seem to be taking that up. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between the universities and the students in terms of how they view BDS?
Well, your question is divided into two. Civil society, represented by one British university student group, and Israelis and the Israeli population in general. As much as I am in favor of and took all the slings and arrows for promoting boycott of settlements and settlement produce, I don't think that the academic boycott as proposed through King's today is going to impact on the Israeli public.
So how do you think that, I mean, what is needed to have that impact in your opinion?
I think there needs to be a major push by companies, companies bigger than those who have started by investing in Israel and then withdrawn from it. I think when you get to the point where organizations and companies like Apple and companies of that scale start to say we're boycotting Israel, then Israelis will start to pick up their ears and listen.
It's a shame. I mean, Paul makes a good point. It is the big companies, and how do you propose that this is going to move forward based on the fact that there is a lot of backlash currently, even on the current motion?
Oh, of course, there's a lot of backlash. But what we must do, we prioritise targeting every single organisation or entity which is complicit in the occupation. For example, when we campaigned against G4S, that was what we had to do at that time. Moving it forward to the wider BDS motion, this is something which, as I say, it must be targeted from all sides, because it's not just one area which Israel is using. The academic boycott is crucial because it has such wide scope, not just in this country, but in America as well. But so, just to make the point about the disconnect, and there is definitely a disconnect, and I think between the students and the university, I think that stems from a complete misunderstanding of what a misunderstanding and misconceptions about what BDS actually is. It's a movement for human rights based on justice and equality. There's been a big movement to portray it as anti-Semitic, wanting the destruction of Israel. It's no such thing. It's entrenched in human rights and equality for all people. So I think the gap between what the Students' Union are saying and the actual university stems from that misconception about what BDS actually is.
Mohammed Amin, I mean, David Willetts has sort of said that there would be no support and there would be no university-led academic boycotts of Israel. Now, you know, a lot of comparison has been made to sort of South Africa in terms of during the times of apartheid. And given what Ehtisham has been saying in terms of the human rights issue, don't you think that this is one way of at least bringing that narrative out in terms of what is happening on the ground in Israel out to a public forum and solving some of these issues? Do you support what David Willetts has been saying?
Not at this point in time. As I said before, you have to clearly distinguish between Israel and the settlements in the West Bank, which are illegal. And Hillary mentioned discrimination inside Israel against Israel's Arab citizens. And that is real, but there are many organizations, including organizations primarily led by Jewish people, like the New Israel Fund, the Abraham Fund initiatives, which I support, which are seeking to counter that discrimination with increasing effectiveness. And I don't see how boycotting Israel helps the 20% of Israel's citizens who are Arabs. And what David Willetts is talking about is an academic boycott against Israeli universities. And I mean, that would be a boycott against Jewish academics from Israel, against Arab academics from Israel. Remember, Israeli academics aren't just Jewish. And I think we have to clearly distinguish between illegal settlements in the West Bank and Israel itself.
On that fact, Hillary, do you think that then the BDS campaign can be divisive because people are not aware of the nuances that are there, that it does become divisive in the end and not really solving the issue?
It is divisive, but I think that's precisely the point, is to confront those apologists for apartheid and those who maybe well-intentioned out of good reasons, or maybe because they support Israel and they want the status quo to remain, allow it to carry on. And the point is, it's an anti-normalization initiative. We want to say, that this isn't normal, that it's not okay for you to have been occupying other people, ethnically cleansing and discriminating against people on the basis of their ethnicity for decades. It is confrontational, that's the point, but as has been said, it's an anti-racist movement. It's for freedom, justice and equality for all citizens. The disconnect is also because of this, it's always been that way throughout history. If you look at apartheid South Africa, the Thatcher government was defending the apartheid regime for a long time while the student movement was pushing against Barclays Bank. And it's the same situation here. It's civil society is pushing for justice when the governments have failed to deliver that.
Paul, what is the reaction from Israel in terms of the BDS? Do they? I mean, I know you mentioned that it's until it hits the bigger companies, but is this seen as a threat, or is this seen as just an irritant that just needs to be dealt with?
I have the feeling that Israelis exist within a deep level of paranoia and rejection of outside criticism. In fact, not only a feeling, I know for a fact that that's the attitude of Middle Israel. Put aside for a moment those on the left and those on the right and the extreme right. Middle Israel is not awake to this. It is paranoid about any external criticisms of it. It won't hear it. I wanted to say something, though, about what Hillary said in terms of disconnects and in terms also of a previous speaker's views about perception. The disconnect and the perceptions are as follows. The disconnect is that Israelis do not see themselves responsible for what goes on in the West Bank. And I am very torn about that perspective because I can't argue against those who say Israel is a country in occupation of another people And yet you try to say, as Israelis and government, what goes on in the occupation is divorced from the government of Israel, a government that's been elected by the people. That argument doesn't work. And as much as I don't like the word apartheid, I'm torn about whether to admit, and so I'm kind of admitting, that the people of Israel elected a government that occupies another people, and that's wrong and it has to stop. But then comes perception. For BDS to stand and say all the nice and comforting words that I've just heard about how it isn't anti-Semitic and it wants to seek justice for all, the people who receive that perception reject it instantaneously and don't see that what's being trying to be achieved by BDS is to force mostly the government of Israel into changing its direction and recognizing that its occupation is wrong. And as I said before, until you've got companies of huge caliber who actually announce, we're not dealing with you anymore unless you change what you're doing with the occupation, I think Israelis will continue in that paranoia and their government will be able to label BDS and virtually any other kind of campaign as anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, etc., etc.
I think that's the key point there. I mean, it is about changing that perception and making sure that the narrative is sharp and well defined. How do you go about that, even at the student level, for example?
Of course, as you said before, we had a lot of backlash while the motion was being debated, along with afterwards. The last couple of days have been quite tense. I think that's an understatement, but it is about defining the camp. It is about defining the campaign, the movement as what it is. It is a human rights movement, a movement for human rights. The fact I don't believe that. I give the opponents of BDS more credit. I don't actually think they believe it's anti-Semitic. I think they are against it because it has the potential to work. It has the potential to end the occupation. So I think that's what, when we have, because we've had healthy debates within our students' union, as I say, during and after the motion. So once that is getting out there, people will understand that that's what it is. It's actually a movement for human rights.
Hilary, I mean, you were nodding your head when Ehtisham was talking about in terms of the debate. Do you think that this healthy debate is taking place in that, and do you think it's part of that process of moving towards and understanding a narrative that will be acceptable by all sides?
Yeah, I mean, the BDS movement is founded on this apartheid analysis, and as Paul has said, the government of Israel knows it's effective. That's why it's investing, millions in trying to oppose student campaigns around the world to boycott. So I think anyone who says it's not effective is sort of it's either propaganda or they're just not really attached to reality. What we're seeing is that BDS actually achieves some of its aims simply by confronting people who oppose it and starting that debate and making people engage with this issue. And it also maybe makes us put our money where our mouth is. Rather than just paying lip service to Palestinian human rights, we're offering practical support and solidarity, which is what Palestinians have asked people of conscience around the world to do, to support them. The majority of civil society made this call. And so I don't think we need to worry so much about Israelis have this siege mentality yet, but what we're seeing is that is splitting the Israeli less right-wing from the far right, and there's disagreements on how to respond, but they know it's a threat, and but it's only a threat to a system that institutionalizes racial oppression.
Paul, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of what would you suggest as a next step in, given what you spoke about, what would you suggest as a next step for BDS? I mean, how should that campaign now be moving forward? Hello, Paul?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were talking to me. I was asked to take my headphones off. It's very irritating because there's feedback in my ears.
All right,
so
okay.
I'll pretend I'm not wearing earphones.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask you, where do you suggest the BDS? Yeah.
I still am afraid, as torn as I am, not in favour of an academic boycott. But I do think that the issue of boycotting settlement produce, which really never got off the ground, needs to be properly addressed. Israel depends a great deal economically on the EU. A deal was made when former Prime Minister Olmert was trade minister with the EU about labelling Israeli produce coming from settlements. Neither the EU nor the government of Israel, having signed the deal, actually kept to that deal. And I think if you want to put pressure where it really will affect people, well, it really will make people wake up, then you need to concentrate on the settlements. One other matter which really is very, very complicating is that Israel itself has now gone and recognized a university in the West Bank, what was Ariel College. For people like me who want to see an end to occupation, who don't want academic boycott, suddenly you're on the edge of a very, very thin wedge. You don't want to boycott Israeli universities, but you do want to boycott Ariel University because it's in the West Bank, in occupied territory.
Mohammed, I mean, just in the final words, how do you think we can measure the BDS? Is it through the number of people its influence? What, in your estimation, what would be a good way of sort of saying that this is working?
Well, the first thing that you need to do is to make sure that you know what your message is, because people are not clear. Some people want to boycott everything to do with Israel itself. Other people, as we just heard from Paul, are very specific. They want to focus on illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And while that message is muddled together, it will be a confusing message and not well understood and is less effective in my view.
Great. I'm sorry we are running out of time again as usual, but I'd like to thank you three in the studio and Paul online for joining us in this fascinating debate. And we will be, I'm sure, continuing the debate much further, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the studio again. Thank you very much, and good night.